Okay, I'll begin then. Um, Thank you all for joining. Apologies in advance for my throat. I am at home with COVID, and it has been very hard on my voice. So today I'll be talking about corporate partners and how we at the Ed Plus Data team uh, essentially tie students to a corporate partner affiliation. Today, I'll start by talking about corporate partners, with a bit of background on them, affiliation eligibility, which I'm calling the building blocks, pitfalls to look out for, and lastly, piecing together the student affiliation. So welcome. My name is Andrew Altman. I am a data analyst for the Ed Plus Data team. And I started here essentially when the pandemic started and everyone went to working remotely as a data analyst for corporate partners. At that time, we had been expanding. We already had a data analyst specifically for Starbucks, and we needed someone to essentially come on and help with the rest of the corporate partners and start building the structure behind corporate partner. So we'll dig into corporate partners. So for a little background on the who, what, when, where, and why, the corporate partner program began back in 2014 as an initiative with Starbucks. The goal of it is that Starbucks wanted to a way to provide an opportunity for their employees to pursue a college degree without the hurdle of rising tuition costs. And so the Starbucks College Achievement Plan was started. Under this program, ASU would provide a scholarship to Starbucks students who applied to an undergraduate degree, first undergraduate degree for ASUO. And then Starbucks would essentially cover the remaining tuition. There are caps on some of that. There's also other things to consider, like types of financial aid and grant and scholarships that are awarded. But the goal of this is that Starbucks really wanted to make sure that its employees had this opportunity and wouldn't leave college with a mountain of debt. So that was in 2014. And since 2014, the number of corporate partners continued to increase. They was all kind of done internally through Ed Plus, but in 2019, we partnered with a group called InStride, and they now manage a majority of our corporate partners. To put it in perspective, Ed Plus continues to manage the relationship with Starbucks and Uber, which accounts for like 8 of the 71 active corporate partners that we do have. And I say 8 because there are different populations within Starbucks and Uber that qualify for different things. The other thing to note here is when I say manage, InStride is responsible for managing that relationship with these corporate partners, ensuring they have the information needed to reach out to their employees and ensure that the corporate partners get information on how the employees are doing. And so we work with InStride to give them information, and InStride then works with the corporate partner to feed that information to them. A few little tidbits here. There's a lot of ways you can slice and dice enrollment numbers and graduates, but at the end of the day, if you look just at unique learners who've ever enrolled at Census, we have over 55,000 that are affiliated to a corporate partner. And we have over 10,000 graduates. That's just individual people. There may be more degrees. We can get into that later. And there will be, I know for a fact that Starbucks is the primary driver behind these graduations, and they have many more coming this fall. The last thing to note about corporate partnerships is that we often think of it in terms of ASUO, but several of the corporate partners offer benefits towards CPE, or what we are calling universal learning courses. And they also cover earned admission. So another big component that I haven't outlined here for corporate partners is to essentially reach learners who may not traditionally go to college. And that may look like people of color, first generation, people who live in poverty, that college just doesn't seem like an option for them. So expanding the programs that these corporate partners offer, like an earned admission, really helps to expand the reach of the program. So moving on for the who, what, when, where, and why, I provided some brief sequel behind capturing who we see as corporate partners in our data warehouse. The main tables here are the PSASU CP Corp table. This essentially just provides the corporate partner codes and descriptions along with effective statuses and dates. We then have a crosswalk that maps CP codes to external system codes, which allows us to join to an external system code table to get descriptions. Of course, corporate partners can't be easy. In one place, there's a CP code. In one place, there's an external system code, which makes things difficult throughout. But if we, when I came on, we worked together with the team and started building out tables. So one of these tables essentially captures this information and persists it as a dimensional table. And so here's an example of what that might look like. I've highlighted Uber since Uber is an easy example. The CP code is like an overarching code that captures a population, but there can be beneficiary populations within that. So as you can see for the code UBR, the description for it is Uber, but then you have two relationships, D standing for dependent and S standing for self. So the D would correlate to an Uber family member. Uber earners can pass their benefit off to a family member, which is one of the really great features of the Uber program. It also makes things very difficult. So to highlight this is just an example of how we might want to persist information so we can keep track of who's who. Moving on, I want to talk about affiliation and eligibility. These are essentially the building blocks of who we consider to be a corporate partner student. The ideal process for corporate partner students is that they RFI essentially through the corporate partners web portal. Now, as we discussed, InStride is responsible for managing that web portal for a lot of learners. And then we have other ones built out for Starbucks and Uber. But essentially what this will do is trigger creation of eligibility records for these students in one of these three tables. Of course, it would be awesome if all this information was just in a single table, but Corporate partners were kind of built piecemeal, starting with Starbucks and expanding. I don't think they could have imagined where they'd be at today. And so they've had to expand in unique ways. It's been challenging from a data perspective. But again, when I came on, there was a goal to persist this in a usable way. So once they RFI, ideally they start an application, submit that application, and in that process, you can select which CP you are a part of, and then a search match process runs, and a record should be created in external systems. This will essentially tell us the student ID that corresponds to an external system ID and the external system code. And then when the student is admitted, additional records will be created in CP student and CP session. Of course, this information, go back. Of course, the information in CP student, CP session is different than what's in the external system. So we are going to have to figure out how to piece those things together. Before we do that, I want to touch on the eligibility tables. We had a lot of information in those 3 eligibility tables, and it's very important that we are getting the correct information when we want to use it. And so one snippet of code that's very useful is this row number. We often have to, if you want the most recent eligibility information, you will need to order by an effective date and an effective sequence, by partner ID and the corp code. Now, if you're working with dependents, you have to have the dependent ID in here as well, which is a whole another complicated thing, but that's the gist of it, is you have to account for effective date and effective sequencing. And these are the main fields that we want. There's a lot of information, but when we talk about eligibility, these 8 fields are the important ones that we will need in order to ensure we see eligible students at certain times. Oh, and of course, as I said, this is a common theme. The eligibility tables do not contain the EMPL ID. And that's because you don't necessarily need to be a student to be in here. So now we need to figure out, how do we tie these to a student ID? And the external system table does that. So before our Redshift migration, there was a PS external system table. They wanted to get rid of that because it held sensitive student information. And so we had to work with the, I forget which team, but we had to work with another team to get a new view created. This last view, the PSASU external sys view, that is a max effective dated version. It's available. It has desensitized, or it removes sensitive information, but it's max effective dated, so we couldn't use that. We had to get a new one added to keep track of when we first see those students. And essentially, the fields that we're most concerned with are the student ID, the partner ID, and the effective date. Unfortunately, so now we have eligibility. We are able to tie it to an EMPL ID, but it doesn't tell us who has been admitted to ASUO. So we have to go to CP student, CP session. Now, in order for a student to get in here, they must be admitted and matriculated into an approved corporate partner program. Some CPs only allow students to pursue specific plans. Think the prime example is Banner Health. Banner Health will help their students pursue a nursing degree, and that's their only program that they allow. Another example, Starbucks. Starbucks only allows their first undergrad degree, so graduate programs would not be allowed. That's taken into account into these programs, so you typically don't need to, or into these tables, you typically don't need to, but it's one thing to always consider when you're working with this information. And again, we should see records in both tables, and ultimately these are the fields that are going to be most valuable to us when we try to assign who we affiliate to which session. And underlying this, we really want to combine CP and external systems, CP student external systems, so we can create a record or persist information of how we see students, when we saw them, and whether or not they're in one place or another. This helps us to keep track of the student and whether or not they belong in a certain table. So I've redacted the sensitive student information. I wasn't sure if I should present that, so I just removed it. But essentially, you get a list of all of the students, any of their corporate affiliations, whether or not we see them in CP student, so they've been admitted to ASU, or if they're just an external system. So they may be in earned admission and working towards getting admitted into ASUO. So there's two pitfalls that we need to look out for. Timing is one of them, and there's a lot of questions to ask. What if an existing learner's company starts offering CP benefits? So what I'm talking about is you're a student now, and you've been a student, and the company you work for is now offering benefits. How do we place you in that timeline? Because we need to ensure that your previous learner experience isn't counted as a corporate partner experience. How do you account for students who work for Starbucks that can quit and get rehired? That moves them in and out of eligibility. Uber's the same way. You can stop and start driving at any time you want. What if a student becomes affiliated during a session? Would they qualify for that session? It depends on timing. What if a student was eligible last term, but their eligibility hasn't updated? Do they still qualify? And what if a student's eligibility changes during the session? The quick answer to a lot of this is we really just measure eligibility at census. And that's how we try to assign eligibility. And that can depend based on what you're trying to look at, but overarching, it's really based on census. So we need a way to match eligibility to census, which we're getting to. And then the other pitfall is that you can have multiple affiliations. Uber drivers can qualify for Rise and Eats at the same time. Beneficiary records often get messed up, and we'll see multiple records for the same learner and different IDs. And you can work for multiple jobs and qualify for multiple CP benefits. You can be an Uber driver and a Starbucks worker. All sorts of weird things happen with the data. The weirdest that I have seen is that it looks like to be two parents both qualify as Uber rides, and they have a child that they pass their benefit on to. So essentially, the father passed the benefit to the child, and then instead of using the benefit himself, he then made himself a beneficiary of the mother's benefit. And it created this weird triangle of trying to figure out who's using whose benefit at what time. So the way that we get around that is coming up, and that will be kind of the last piece of all this and in our corporate partner category. So piecing it together. So the first thing we had to do is essentially create a log of eligibility that maps a student's EMPL ID, external system information, to their eligibility records. We're talking about timing for between, I think it's 6 different tables to match everything up. The way that we did this is we essentially used a series of row number and lead functions within SQL to grab the appropriate records at the certain time, at the appropriate time, and then essentially create an end date. The end date is probably the most important part of all of this, because that can tell us when that eligibility started and ended, and now we can try and tie that to a census date. I've kind of outlined what that looks like. If we have another eligibility date, we want to just make that end date 1 second before the new eligibility date, but we also need to cap it at 90 days if it's not updated. And then the last thing is current recipient. This isn't too hard, but you just need to know that this is meant to keep track of who between an earner and a beneficiary is using the benefit. So a little SQL snippet from the eligibility log here. This is essentially creates an external system log and tells us when a external system record started and ended for a student. Of course, like I said, nothing's easy. And for some reason, we can have multiple records in there, and sometimes with different external system IDs. So we need to ensure that matches up appropriately with the eligibility records. And then here's kind of the base of what the eligibility component might look like. You don't need to get lost in the weeds here, but the most important is really this row number to ensure that we are partitioning and ordering in the appropriate sequence to map these eligibility records to the appropriate EMPL ID at the right time. And so and then lastly, we can account for some of the nuanced end date time stuff and corporate or current recipient logic. So what that looks like is something like this. We have and this is from most recent to first. So essentially we end up creating a log telling us which student is eligible at what time, whether or not they're a current recipient. And we can take this and use the start date and end date to see if census fits in there somewhere. This table has been tremendously helpful in keeping track of corporate partner eligibility and helping us assign a student to a particular time. And then we can use this in conjunction with the next thing I'm about to talk about, which is the corporate partner category. So what this does with eligibility, you can still have multiple eligible affiliations. We want to tie a single student and affiliation to a session. The way we did this is we essentially said, what's most important? And we decided that whatever CP awarded that student the most money in scholarship was the most important. That's who we want you to be affiliated to. The next part is who was affiliated most recently. So if their award was the same, we need another way to say who's more important. And then to ensure mostly consistency between our records and Ed Plus, we need to prioritize earners over beneficiaries and essentially order by an external system code. Otherwise, you can get inconsistencies. It's minor, but it's best to remain consistent across the different data sources. And this is the main function of that code. Again, you probably don't need to worry too much about this. The biggest thing is this first row number, which I'll dig into here. And it essentially looks at the CP scholarship and tuition benefit awarded before census as most important, when their external system affiliation date was as second important, when they were added to CP session, beneficiary designation, external system. So this is kind of the linchpin of our corporate partner category logic. And so you end up essentially with 4 columns telling us which student, career, and session for a corporate partner. Last thing to mention is that we've been working with enterprise technology to have a view created in the ASU student schema, and they've implemented it. The problem is the full query has a table with restricted access. So if you have access to financial aid restricted, you'll be able to see this. And this matches the corporate partner logic that we use in EdPlus data teams dashboards. If you don't have access, don't worry. We're working on moving that table to ASU student so everyone will have access. And that's the gist of it. I don't think I have anything else. So if anyone has any questions, let me know.
Hey, Andrew, we were muted over here. I work for corporate engagement and strategic partnerships, and we help the university understand what companies are doing and how they're interacting with us. Who are the top 5 corporate partners aside from, I know Starbucks and Uber, obviously they're in your presentation, but are there any others? You mentioned Banner Health. I know there's 71, but what are the sort of top ones to pay attention to?
It's kind of tough. The Starbucks, definitely, they've been there since inception and make up a majority of our corporate partner students and graduates. Uber is another big one. It kind of depends on the time. Right now, there's a big focus on Amazon because it's new. It's also unique because they will have on-ground students. And we have other ones coming into the pipeline as well. But any other ones to focus on? I think Banner Health is an important one. It's and it depends on who you're talking to, right? Like for Banner, for the nursing program, it is a big one. So I know that there's been some work done there recently that I've been working on. Trying to think if there's anyone else that stands out. It kind of just depends. We do meet with InStride, and we look at several. This is probably kind of on a quarterly basis. We'll look at several corporate partners and kind of look at the details behind them, but no one in particular stands out besides kind of Amazon right now. And I wouldn't want to say anything else because I don't have the numbers off the top of my head.
Yeah. So we prepare these sort of information tear sheets for ASU leadership. And does your team have a general inbox that I could email to maybe get more information? So when we do put together these sheets of information about the companies, that maybe you guys could pull that, or is there somewhere where I can pull that manually myself?
I know someone you can contact.
Okay.
But if you want to just message me,
yeah, I will.
I can then find out what the best way to do to get you that information is.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Very specific question, but
No, that's awesome.
my name's Tyler, by the way, so I'll reach out to you.
Okay, cool.
I just have, Andrew, this might be more of a data conference question, but will these slides be available anywhere? I feel like this logic is really helpful in the way it's presented, but I probably will need it for when I'm actually trying to dig more into. Like, I think it would be a really nice thing to have this in the order you presented it and everything.
Okay, yeah, they should be. If not, if you don't have access, feel free to reach out and I can just send them over to you.
Thank you. That was really helpful.
Yeah, sure. Glad it helped you.
I think that's it for questions in here.
Cool.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks for joining.
Talking to the black hole.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye.